Hello all, welcome back to Consciousness Rising book readings. We're going to continue on with this really important book, The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke, and today will be Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Tactics. There is no such thing as anarchy, there is only tyranny. All cultures teach the nobility of authority. All pretend to defend the security of people against enemies who would do harm. The common thread amongst every authority in history is the universal enemy of anarchy. While cultures have added racism, economy, terrorism, nationalism, and countless other enemies to the mix, anarchy exists as the enemy of every culture. There is no such thing as anarchy. You will not kill your neighbour in the absence of police. You are not evil. Those who wish this type of control and violence over others teach you that you are not worthy of ruling yourself. They teach that you lack intelligence, self-control and value. They teach that only government can rule you. The word government means tyranny. It exists to establish ownership of you. You need no government governing. You are a human being and as such have infinite worth. You and you alone rightfully control your actions, your speech and your labour. All who seek these things of you must receive your permission first. All who do not are evil. Anarchy is a lie. It is created by tyrants to deceive you. There is no such thing as anarchy, there is only tyranny. Royalty. From the earliest days of man, there have been those who looked around them and saw others as tools to be used. Instead of building themselves up in wisdom and understanding, where infinite prosperity is possible, they designed on the laziness of theft and control. In primitive form, these are men who would use superior physical strength and the threat of violence to cower people. The demands they made were simple: money. The stronger men could live off the work of others. The success of such men is measured in modern culture's terms for them. Some are thugs and brutes, others barbarians and bandits. Because of their limited success and unending brutality, such evil rarely held people in bondage for long. Revolts and power struggles were common. It was extremely difficult for a person to maintain his grip of extortion over people. As history progressed, men of significantly more cunning devised the element of control necessary to stabilize power over people. This element is culture. Instead of extortion and brutality, they created the notions of rightful rule and royalty. Their objective was to preclude the people from revolt by teaching them that their authority was legitimate. This is the singular objective of all culture. For thousands of years, the culture of royalty enslaved all of humanity under the names chief, king, and emperor. All titles of nobility were designed to reinforce the image of familial loyalty. People who are naturally respectful and deferent towards their families were taught that royalty was the greater family. The king was, in all cultures, viewed as something between a father and a god. This idolatry of the family is the cornerstone of royalty. People were taught that to obey nobility was the greater form of respecting their father and mother. Culture's objective was to twist the understanding of people so that they believed that extortionists held a rightful place in their lives. The result was that people rarely fought back. Every aspect of the culture of royalty taught people concepts such as nobility, loyalty, duty, and honour. Each of these ideas are lies. They are designed to teach people that their worth is less than the worth of the king. Without the trappings of culture, he would simply be a thug taking food and labour at the point of a sword. With it, he is His Majesty, the King. All culture is lie, designed specifically to keep the powerful in power. History of freedom. As the era of kings was closing, cultures began to disintegrate and freedom grew. This was precipitated by two very specific and very powerful attacks against royalty, the Magna Carta and the Declaration of Independence. Every time cultures are attacked, people begin to learn more about their value. When rebellion spread among people of astounding courage, culture lost its grip and people were able to see that there was no king who had claim upon them. They started to see a glimpse of their own worth. The engineers of evil understood that the world had finally learned how to see past the culture of royalty. With the astonishing speed of only a few generations, they engineered the culture of nations to replace it. Under the umbrella of nationality, people are slaves to borders more than at any time in history. The power of my king has been replaced by the culturally superior our country. Nations have caused greater death and slavery than any degree of royalty ever envisioned. The history of freedom shows that even as nations grow strong, the cultural lessons from royalty have been learned. Freedom progresses around the world as population increases. Cultures are destroyed by freedom routinely, and the lessons of each new tactic of deceit are being learned around the world. The violence of nations increases as the cries of freedom are raised. Hundreds of millions have been murdered and billions enslaved in recent history, all in futile attempts by evil men to stay in power. As the stability of their empires is challenged, they rain blood upon the heads of their protectorates. The history of freedom shows that such violence is not the growth of evil, but its death. Violence and the enforcement of law are necessary only when culture's grip fails to effectively control the minds of people. The death of kings, the transitions of nations, the mutations of culture, and the violence of governments are evidence of the end of evil. Authorities of all kinds are struggling for breath in a world that is learning how to drown them forever. In the world you and I occupy, the war is already won. We have only to watch evil die. Nations. Nations are a generic umbrella of culture that prove extremely effective for authorities. Nations use commonality in race, language, and heritage to persuade ownership of people. Their only shared agent is the border. As the cultures of royalty disintegrated, nations were created to replace them. Authority sow the same stability of extortion that kingdoms provided, but needed to escape the understanding that people had learned about the tyranny of royalty. They created a new enemy called them and a new culture called we. Nations drew lines across the globe and eventually swallowed up every inch of inhabitable land known to man. All those who live within these lines become the property of the state. They are taught that they own their governments by means of democracy, communism, theocracy, and race. They are taught that their nations belong to them. This is the culture of we. The truth is that their nations own them. Nations are created and borders drawn to create stability for authority. While royalty improved stability by convincing people that they owed allegiance to authority, nations took a bigger step and taught people that they were the authority. National cultures deceive the minds of people to more effectively extort money and control. As soon as you lend credibility to a predatory institution, they will make prey of you. Disguised as sheep, they will have you believe that they are defending you from anarchy or any other kind of enemy that they can devise. Their laws do not speak of these enemies, they speak of you, how much money you owe, and what you will do for them. Government is an agent of force. As soon as power is yielded to authority, as soon as you give it license to take life and liberty, it becomes an agent of evil. Evil men who seek authority over you will not fight government. All evil that wants is power over you. Evil naturally seeks its place in government. There have been many forms of nations created, all with varying degrees of effectiveness in their control. Without exception, the strongest governments are those whose culture most effectively convinces people that the people are the government. All others soon fall. This is why democracies are the strongest form of nation possible. They are introduced last. Communism and socialism. Socialism, communism, and welfare states all have different applications in history and idea, yet they are all exactly the same. They all teach people that they are unable to effectively produce enough to support their own lives. They are given the enemies of greed and destitution as the reasons why authority is needed in their lives. Communism is the second most effective form of evil that has ever existed, and it is the most destructive ever achieved. Communism taught that people require equality of materials rather than the freedom to create. Communism used the lie that people would be part owners of the government in order to garner their support for slave labour and soldiering. Anybody reading the implementation of communism or its similar constructs should readily see evil. There is nothing wrong with a community helping each other. There is no sin in sacrifice or giving, but as with all culture, these ideas were lies. There is no sacrifice in communism and socialism, and there is no giving. They are always implemented by force. Socialism and welfare teach that people do not own their own labours. They distract people with cultural ideas of duty and brotherhood. Their true nature is the nature of force. Nothing in welfare and socialism is done by choice. Nothing is implemented under threat of violence. As with all culture, welfare and socialism are evil. Tyranny has destroyed countless more lives than poverty could even dream. In times of poverty, only one thing stands in the way of people: government. Governments use violence to restrict freedom and therefore people's ability to better their lives. Under the pretense of ending poverty, authorities have used compulsion and violence to create more death and destruction than any storm, any famine, and any drought. It is the element of force that belies the tyranny of all socialistic ideals. Without force, there is no evil in them. With force, they are the same as any other government. They bring misery to humanity. Dictators. A dictator bears similarity to the kings of royalty while maintaining a culture of nationalism. There is the common belief in history that dictators and kings are noble. Any time a national culture is strong, leaders are thought of as pure and righteous. Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler are just two examples. After their deaths, their people were shocked to learn that the atrocities of their nations were created by them. History records endless testimonies of people who believed that the terror in their lives was happening without their leaders' knowledge. National Socialists actually viewed the terror they brought to Europe as a defensive war. Wherever you see culture supporting an authority or trying to implement an authority, you will find the destruction of freedom. In every culture, people are deceived into believing that authority is good. Even when they can see the tyranny of authority in history, they fail to see it in their own culture. The greatest mistakes of history have been those of inaction. Killing a man because he advocates the destruction of liberty sounds extreme to people of all cultures. Culture indoctrinates people with this thinking, yet the logic of killing Adolf Hitler, Mao Zedong, and Vladimir Lenin, instead of allowing them to destroy the liberty of lives of billions, is unavoidable. The idea of killing a dictator in cold blood before they murder millions is offensive because the cultures who protect these leaders design themselves that way, and so evil prospers. Peace is found when people stand for morality and reject culture, defend freedom at all costs and at all times, and peace will rule the world instead of tyrants. Morality enforced. Cultures love teaching people that morality is properly enforced. It is the ultimate deceit, a powerful lie. Cultures teach that morality and prudence are one and the same. Culture can easily claim authority over people when they believe that doing something foolish is the same as doing something evil. Morality is freedom. Immorality is the destruction of freedom. Morality is good. Immorality is evil. Culture would have you believe that morality is a question of personal vice. It pretends that imprudence is the same thing as immorality. When people believe that enforcing prudence is the same as defending liberty, they can be used to support dramatic increases in the power of authority over people. The Inquisitions of medieval times used the ideas of enforcing morality to expand the power of the Roman Church. They created law and enforcement to force church government into people's lives. It was culturally acceptable because they were enforcing morality instead of simple arbitrary control. The American prohibition of alcohol was touted as a way to counter the effects of alcohol's control over people. In order to fight that control, the US government established a massive police force to control the lives of people. Those who would force prudence on people teach that people are not able to learn intelligent behaviors on their own. Culture teaches that people must not be free to make personal mistakes. It teaches that people are not worthy of ruling their own lives. Without freedom, prudence is meaningless. Environmentalism. Environmentalism shares the ideas of communism. Ideals of communism. It teaches that greed is the enemy and that those in search of money will destroy the earth. The enemy of greed is the same enemy that communism employs. It is the same lie. They both teach that without authority, free people will destroy themselves. They both teach that government is necessary to enforce security. Environmentalism has one new twist on the ancient lies of evil. It teaches that the dirt you stand on is more valuable than you. It teaches that authority is necessary to ensure that you do not destroy it. As with all evil, it really only cares that you obey. What excuse people choose to follow is of no concern to evil. Culture teaches that the only security to be found in life is in government. Only they can secure your water, your air, and your food, yield authority to them. The strength of environmentalism is that it can be used to regulate every aspect of your life: transportation, food, housing, energy, and communication. They all fall under this umbrella of regulation and control. Environmentalism is just one more excuse to implement slavery. Bureaucracy. It is extremely important to see that bureaucracy is not just an inconvenience. The slavery of bureaucracy lies in force and compulsion. Those under its power are taught to overlook bureaucracy as just another fact of life. The truth is that bureaucracy does not sustain or improve life. It drains it. The culture of bureaucracy is incredibly strong in many areas of the world. It is able to convince people that they are free while subjecting them to realms of licensing, fees, permissions, and reporting requirements. Failure to obey results in fines, imprisonment, or death. This is their freedom. Bureaucracy benefits primarily those who make their money from it. These are government employees and controllers. One of their favoured tactics in achieving new regulation is the stacking of laws. An example is safety requirements like helmet and seatbelt laws. Such things presume goodness, but evil doesn't care if you are safe. It only cares that you are forced. Bureaucrats make the case for new regulations by leveraging previous regulation. They may extort money for the purpose of paying medical costs for trauma victims. They can then claim the need for helmet and seatbelt laws because they are obligated to pay medical costs. A bureaucrat's solution to problems created by law is more law. The obvious objective is law itself. Terrorism. Terrorism has nothing to do with America and nothing to do with religion. Terrorism follows the pattern of tyranny precisely. Many areas of the world are dramatically affected by increasing technology. As messages and images of freedom reach new corners of the world, people begin to see the tyranny of their own cultures. As culture loses its grip on people, authority increases its violence. Terrorism is authority attempting to teach people that freedom is depravity and corruption. Terrorism is authority attempting to teach people that freedom is anarchy and freedom is to be feared. Terrorism has been used throughout history to coerce populations to yield their authority and governance to those hungry for power and lacking of conscience. Terrorism is rarely used against those over whom power is sought. Hitler's terrorism against the Jews is a formidable example of the use of terror to gain power over the German people. Al-Qaeda exemplifies the use of terrorism against American peoples in order to maintain power and influence over Islamic peoples. Terrorism is proof of the pattern of liberty. It is precisely because tyrannical states are afraid of losing the grip they have had over their peoples for so long that terrorism is a rising factor in the world. Evil is afraid. Rights. There is no such thing as a right. All people are inherently free. The idea of right was created by men who sought to free people from some of the burdens of government, but who still believed that governments were supreme over men. The problem with rights is that they offer certain delineated permissions granted to men by government. After these, government can still dispose of you as it pleases, even in measures of restriction. This still teaches people that they have less value than law. The truth is that you are free, and there is no authority that has any claim upon you, ever. You are, by your nature, already free. This is the value of a human being. Law enforcement. Culture teaches that police are the only ones whose right it is to defend the people. It teaches that if people were able to defend themselves, anarchy would be the result. The penalty for defending yourself instead of relying on police protection is usually extremely severe. The reason is obvious. It shows the ultimate tyranny of law. If you aren't helpless, then they have little premise to remain in power over you. The intention of law enforcement is not to defend your liberty. It is to defend the stability of the machines of extortion. Laws do not say no killing, no raping, no stealing. Instead, they are volume upon volume of minutiae, controlling every aspect of life and destroying liberty wherever they go. Every government agency are enforcers of these laws. The law is not righteous, neither are the enforcers of it. It is a mistake to blindly respect law enforcement as noble and brave. Laws are designed to control, not to protect. An officer of government may believe what he is doing is right. That is exactly what culture wants him to think. Every single one of the hundreds of millions who have died at the hands of governments died under legal premise. Law is not morality. Laws, rules and regulations by themselves are of little danger to humanity. They presume authority to rule over you, and culture demands that you obey them. But they would eventually be ignored as people test and finally discover freedom. It is the violent enforcement of law that bears the ultimate evil. Enforcement is the core of law, since all laws require enforcement in order to control people. Respect for law enforcement is an invitation to tyranny. Every culture in the history of Earth has taught its people that police are good and noble. Medieval knights excused their tyranny by calling it chivalry. Terrorist cultures excuse theirs by calling it religion. No matter what culture you observe, you will find a belief that the enforcers of law are good. The important question has nothing to do with the nobility of the people who enforce law. It is a question of the nobility of the law. Presuming the righteousness of the agents who enforce the law is precisely what cultures are designed to do, because they excuse the nature of the law. This invitation is exploited heavily by history's dictators, kings and mafias. What better place to hide atrocities large and small than the very group of armed men who hold a monopoly on violence and respect? The penalty for disobeying authority is always death. All who have stood in open rebellion against existing powers throughout history were killed. Today, even in free nations, men are killed for rebellion. If they cannot force you to obey with intimidation, they use threat. If threat is not enough, they use kidnapping and imprisonment. If that fails, you will be murdered. Which law you break is irrelevant. Even such a little law as a speeding ticket, fail to pull over, resist arrest, try to escape or fight back, it happens regularly. The penalty is death. Price of government. The stiffest penalties of law are reserved not for those that you are to be protected from, but for those who fail to pay the price of protection. The entire purpose of evil is to enslave you, to destroy your freedom in order to make you a tool for someone else's use. Just as mafia extortion rackets reserve brutal beatings for those who fail to pay the tax, the world's most effective governments use a system of threats, abuse, intimidation, imprisonment and death to ensure that taxes are paid. This isn't a side note. This is the very purpose for why cultures and law are created, to sacrifice your labour for the benefit of your masters. When law challenges its competition, it labels them criminals and racketeers. The definition of racketeering is the creation of a threat and then charging for protection against it. Such racketeering is institutionalized slavery. Mafias and governments follow the same pattern. History shows us that the names given to each are a matter of who is the more successful extortionist. Summary. Nations lay claim to people based upon where they are born with respect to imaginary geographic lines. The truth is that a nation is simply a group of people with guns who will kill you if you do not obey them. Borders and land masses have nothing to do with your value as a human being. They are created to offer rulers stability as they exercise powers over you. We is the word commandeered by culture to legitimize the borders and boundaries of law. You are obligated to obey law under penalty of death because you are part of the we within an imaginary geographic line. This is not a we you have joined by choice. This is not a we you can escape. Your ownership of land, your family and your values are not important to we. In our world, the only escape from the tyranny of we is to substitute one we for another, assuming we will let you. Evil would have you believe that you are a subject of borders. This is a lie. After millennia of kings, those who were not royalty but sought power found a way to seize it. Nations allowed evil men to remain in control of culture and law, to have authority. Hitler called his version National Socialism. Vladimir Lenin called his version Communism. Some are called empires, some theocracies, and some democracies. All have one thread in common: the supremacy of the state. Under nations, culture teaches that no one is above the law, and because nations are defined geographically, no one can escape the law. Put more concisely, nations teach that you are worth less than the law. The definition of evil is the destruction of freedom. If governments were what they pretend by choice, they would not be government. They would be charitable institutions. Since choice is destroyed, freedom is dead, and whomever can control the government prevails. Governments, by definition, hold a monopoly on violence. Those who seek power over you will not fight your government. They fight it. Why fight it when what they wanted to begin with was authority over you? You already have the institution evil men seek. It is natural for evil to seek its place in government. History shows us that every nation ever devised can and will be used as a tool on behalf of evil men. Evil seeks power. This is an immutable truth. The more power you vest in a government, the more evil you will find there. And that concludes that chapter. I hope you're enjoying it, and I hope that, when you listen to these, I hope it gives you much to think about, because this is a powerful book, as I keep saying. Powerful, powerful words, and this book is truth at its very core. Alright, see you in the next one, guys. Take care.